The morning sun cast long shadows through the towering glass windows of First Metropolitan Bank as Marcus Richardson adjusted his worn leather jacket. At 68, he carried himself with quiet dignity despite deliberately choosing to wear his oldest clothes today: faded jeans, scuffed boots, and thick-rimmed reading glasses that he'd kept from a decade ago. Marcus had spent 45 years climbing the corporate ladder, eventually becoming one of the most successful black banking executives in the country. 3 months ago, he had quietly acquired this regional banking chain, but chose to keep the news private. Today's visit wasn't just another bank inspection, it was a test of character. Standing across the street, Marcus checked his reflection in a store window. Gone was the tailored suit that usually adorned his tall frame. The man staring back at him looked exactly like what he wanted to portray: a regular elderly black man seeking banking services. He smiled, remembering his grandmother's words. Sometimes, son, you need to see people's true colors when they don't think anyone's watching. At precisely 9:15 a.m., Marcus crossed the street and entered the bank. The security guard barely glanced up from his phone, though his posture stiffened slightly. The marble floors gleamed under bright fluorescent lights as early morning customers began trickling in. Marcus had deliberately chosen this downtown branch. It was one of the biggest in the city and handled significant daily transactions. Taking a seat in the waiting area, Marcus pulled out a newspaper and began to read, occasionally glancing over his reading glasses at the developing scene around him. A young white couple entered after him and was immediately greeted warmly by a bank employee. "Good morning. How can we help you today?" The couple hadn't even made an appointment. Marcus had scheduled his visit under the name Michael Roberts, specifically requesting a meeting about opening a premium account. He watched as 3 more customers who arrived after him were called up to the service desk. Each time, the bank employee's eyes would skip over him as if he were invisible. 2 loan officers chatted near the water cooler, occasionally throwing glances in his direction. Marcus could read their body language: the crossed arms, the whispered conversations, the uncomfortable shifts in posture. He'd seen it all before, countless times throughout his career. The only difference was that now he owned the place. Sarah Chen, his executive assistant, would be arriving in exactly 45 minutes. They had planned this carefully. She would come in for their scheduled meeting, just when things would likely reach their peak. Marcus knew from experience how these situations typically played out. A young banker in an ill-fitting suit approached an elderly white woman who had just walked in. "Ma'am, can I help you with anything today?" he asked eagerly, despite Marcus having waited for nearly 20 minutes already. The woman smiled, explaining she was just there to make a deposit. Marcus folded his newspaper and walked to the customer service desk. The young woman behind the counter visibly tensed as he approached. "Good morning," he said pleasantly, his deep voice carrying the weight of years of experience. "I have an appointment under the name Michael Roberts. I'm interested in discussing your premium banking services." The woman, whose nameplate read Jessica, typed something into her computer with obvious reluctance. "Sir, I don't see any appointment under that name," she said, despite Marcus having received a confirmation email the previous day. "Perhaps you're in the wrong branch?" "I can assure you, I'm in the right place," Marcus replied calmly, pulling out his appointment confirmation from his worn leather wallet. The appointment was confirmed for 9:15 a.m. today. Jessica's eyes narrowed as she examined the paper, her expression a mixture of doubt and dismissal. "I'll need to speak with my manager about this," she said, rising from her desk. "Please take a seat." As Marcus returned to the waiting area, he noticed 2 security guards had moved closer to his position. A small group of employees had gathered near the branch manager's office, throwing furtive glances in his direction. He checked his watch: 30 minutes until Sarah's arrival. Little did they know, the man they were treating with such suspicion had signed their paychecks for the past 3 months. Marcus settled back into his chair, pulled out his newspaper again, and waited for the situation to unfold. Sometimes the best lessons in life came from experiencing the sting of one's own prejudices. 25 minutes had passed since Marcus first sat down in the waiting area. The tension in the bank lobby had grown thick enough to cut with a knife. More employees had gathered near the manager's office, whispering among themselves while pretending to shuffle papers and look busy. Marcus watched as the branch manager, a balding man in his 50s named Richard Thompson, emerged from his office. Thompson's face wore the practiced expression of someone who had dealt with difficult situations before. He straightened his red tie and walked purposefully toward Jessica's desk, speaking to her in hushed tones while occasionally glancing in Marcus's direction. The two security guards had positioned themselves strategically, one near the entrance and the other closer to where Marcus sat. Their hands rested on their belts, a subtle but clear message of intimidation. Marcus had seen this scenario play out countless times during his 45 years in banking. The only difference was that usually he had been the one fighting against such practices from the executive level. A young mother with two children entered the bank, clutching a stack of papers. She took one look at the tense atmosphere and instinctively pulled her children closer. The security guard near the door immediately stepped forward to assist her, his voice warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the cold shoulder Marcus had received. Thompson finally approached Marcus, flanked by Jessica and another loan officer. "Sir," he began, his tone condescending, "I understand there seems to be some confusion about an appointment today." Marcus looked up from his newspaper, his expression calm and measured. "There's no confusion, Mr. Thompson. I have a confirmed appointment to discuss premium banking services." He held up the confirmation email again. The branch manager barely glanced at the paper. "I see. Well, sir, I'm afraid we're experiencing some technical difficulties with our premium services today. Perhaps I can direct you to our sister branch in the East Side. They might be better equipped to handle your specific needs." The East Side branch, Marcus knew, was in a predominantly black neighborhood. The implications weren't lost on him. Several customers in the lobby had stopped their transactions to watch the scene unfold. "I prefer to handle my business here," Marcus replied firmly. "I've had an account with First Metropolitan for over 30 years, though not at this branch." Thompson's face tightened. "Sir, if you can't provide proper identification and proof of funds for a premium account, I'm afraid we can't help you today." His voice had risen slightly, drawing more attention from other customers. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, causing both security guards to step forward tensely. He slowly pulled out his wallet again, making deliberate movements to avoid any misinterpretation. "I believe this should suffice," he said, pulling out a platinum credit card. Jessica examined the card with obvious skepticism, as if expecting it to be counterfeit. "Sir, this type of card requires a minimum annual income that's quite substantial." Her emphasis on the last word made it clear she didn't believe he could possibly qualify. Just then, the bank's front door opened, and a sharp click of heels announced a new arrival. Sarah Chen, Marcus's executive assistant, walked in wearing a crisp business suit, her tablet computer tucked under her arm. She stopped short at the scene before her eyes widening in recognition. "Mr. Richardson," she exclaimed, her voice carrying across the now silent lobby. "I'm so sorry I'm late for our meeting. I hope you haven't been waiting long." The effect was immediate. Thompson's face went from smug superiority to shocked recognition in a split second. Jessica nearly dropped the platinum card she was still holding. The security guards stepped back so quickly they almost tripped over their own feet. "Not at all, Sarah," Marcus replied calmly, standing up to his full height. "The staff here has been providing me with quite an educational experience." Thompson's face had turned an interesting shade of pale as the realization hit him. The man they had been trying to chase away for the past half hour was not only legitimate, but was, in fact, their new CEO, the very same Marcus Richardson whose memo about increasing diversity and inclusion they had received just last week. "Mr. Richardson," Thompson stammered. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Marcus picked up his newspaper and folded it carefully. "Oh, I don't think there's been any misunderstanding at all, Mr. Thompson. In fact, I believe everything that happened here today has been perfectly clear." The bank lobby had fallen completely silent. Every eye was fixed on Marcus Richardson as he stood calmly facing branch manager Thompson, whose forehead had broken out in nervous sweat. Sarah Chen moved to stand beside her boss, her tablet ready to take notes. "Perhaps," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed space, "we should continue this conversation in your office, Mr. Thompson." It wasn't a request, and everyone knew it. Thompson nodded quickly, almost tripping over himself as he led the way. The security guards had retreated to their posts, suddenly finding the floor tiles intensely interesting. Jessica sat at her desk, her face burning red with shame as she remembered her earlier treatment of the man who was, in fact, her CEO. Other employees quickly dispersed, pretending to be busy with their work while stealing glances at the manager's office. Inside the office, Thompson fumbled with the chairs, offering the best one to Marcus. "Mr. Richardson, sir, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for this misunderstanding. If I had known." "That's precisely the problem, isn't it?" Marcus interrupted, his voice firm but measured. "You treated me differently because you didn't know who I was. The question is, how many other capable, qualified individuals have you turned away because they didn't match your preconceptions of what a premium banking client should look like?" Sarah had positioned herself by the door, taking detailed notes of the conversation. Thompson's eyes darted between her tablet and Marcus, realizing that every word was being documented. "Sir, I assure you, we follow all corporate policies regarding equal treatment," Thompson began, but Marcus raised his hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Let's review what happened in the last hour, shall we?" Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "I arrived with a confirmed appointment. I was ignored for 20 minutes while other customers who came after me were served. When I approached the desk, my appointment was questioned despite having written confirmation. Your staff suggested I go to the East Side branch, a clear example of racial steering. Finally, when I produced a platinum card, it was assumed to be fraudulent." Thompson's face grew paler with each point. "Mr. Richardson, please. I have a family to support. This job is very important to you," Marcus finished. "Just as banking services are important to every person who walks through those doors, regardless of their appearance." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm not here to fire you, Mr. Thompson." The branch manager's relief was palpable, but short-lived as Marcus continued. "I'm here to change things. Starting tomorrow, this branch will be the pilot location for our new comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program. Every employee, including you, will undergo extensive training on unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and fair banking practices." Sarah made a note on her tablet, and Thompson nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Whatever you think is best." Furthermore, Marcus continued, "I want a complete audit of all loan applications from the past year. We'll be reviewing rejection rates based on demographics, and if we find any patterns of discrimination, there will be consequences." Marcus stood up, straightening his old leather jacket. "Mr. Thompson, I built my career in banking from the ground up. I've faced discrimination at every level, and I've worked too hard to allow it to continue under my leadership. This bank will set a new standard for inclusive banking. It starts right here, today." Thompson, still seated, looked up at Marcus with a mixture of fear and newfound respect. "I understand, sir. We won't let you down." "See that you don't," Marcus replied. He turned to Sarah. "Please send me the audit report by the end of the week, and schedule a meeting with HR about implementing the new training program." As Marcus and Sarah walked through the lobby, the employees who had earlier ignored or dismissed him now stood straight, nodding respectfully. Near the entrance, Marcus paused and turned to address the whole branch. "Remember this day," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Remember how quick you were to judge someone based on their appearance. And remember that change is coming. You can either be part of that change, or you can find somewhere else to work." With those words, Marcus Richardson walked out of the bank, leaving behind a group of employees who had just received the most important lesson of their careers. The old leather jacket he wore now seemed to carry a different meaning, not of poverty or unworthiness, but of a powerful message about judgment, dignity, and the need for change in the banking industry. The following morning, the atmosphere at First Metropolitan Bank was electric with tension. Word had spread. In the conference room, nervous employees fidgeted in their chairs as Thompson stood at the front, his usual confident demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. The door opened, and Marcus Richardson walked in, this time wearing an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. Sarah Chen followed, carrying several thick folders. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice commanding immediate attention. "I trust you've all had time to reflect on yesterday's events." He looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. Some looked away, unable to hold his gaze. Jessica, the customer service representative from yesterday, sat in the back row, her eyes red as if she hadn't slept. Next to her, the two security guards looked equally uncomfortable in their chairs, their usual authoritative presence diminished. Today marks the beginning of significant changes at this branch, Marcus continued, taking position at the front of the room. Ms. Chen will distribute the new protocols we're implementing immediately. Sarah began passing out the folders as Marcus spoke. Inside these folders, you'll find our revised customer service guidelines, anti-discrimination policies, and details about the mandatory training program beginning next week. Thompson cleared his throat nervously. Sir, I've already begun reviewing our loan application processes, and I've noticed some concerning patterns that need addressing. Marcus nodded approvingly. Good. That's the kind of proactive response I expect, but understanding the problem is only the first step. Now we need to fix it. He walked slowly around the room as he spoke. Each of you will undergo comprehensive training in unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and fair lending practices. This isn't just about following regulations. It's about changing the culture of this institution. One of the loan officers, a young man named David, raised his hand hesitantly. Mr. Richardson, sir, I want to apologize for yesterday. I never realized how our biases were affecting our work until I saw it through your eyes. Apologies are good, Mr. Parker, Marcus replied, remembering the young man's name from personnel files he'd reviewed overnight. But actions are better. I expect each of you to become examples of what inclusive banking looks like. Sarah stepped forward with another document. We're also implementing a new community outreach program. This branch will host weekly financial literacy workshops open to all community members, with a focus on underserved populations. The employees exchanged glances as they realized the scope of changes coming their way. Marcus continued, every person who walks through those doors deserves the same respect and service, regardless of their appearance, accent, or the clothes they wear. Jessica suddenly stood up, her voice trembling. Mr. Richardson, I can't continue working here knowing how I treated you, how I've probably treated others. I'd like to submit my resignation. Marcus raised his hand to stop her. Sit down, Ms. Carter. Running away won't solve anything. Instead, I want you to lead our new customer service training program. Your experience yesterday makes you uniquely qualified to help others understand the impact of their biases. Jessica's eyes widened in surprise, and she slowly sat back down. Thompson looked at his watch. It was almost time to open the bank. One more thing, Marcus said, his voice growing stern. I will be monitoring this branch closely. Any further incidents of discrimination will result in immediate termination. Is that clear? The room responded with a chorus of yes, sir. Very well, Marcus concluded. Mr. Thompson, you'll receive daily reports from our new oversight team. Ms. Chen will be conducting random audits. Remember, this isn't just about keeping your jobs. It's about being better bankers and better human beings. As the employees filed out to prepare for opening, Marcus caught Thompson's arm. Richard, you've been in banking for 20 years. Use that experience to lead this change, not resist it. Thompson nodded solemnly. I understand, sir. I won't let you down this time. Marcus watched as the staff took their positions, their movements more deliberate and thoughtful than the day before. Through the glass doors, he could see customers beginning to gather for the bank's opening. Today would be different, he thought. Today would be the first day of real change. Sarah approached with his schedule for the day. The other branch managers are waiting for their video conference with you, sir. Shall we begin? Marcus straightened his tie. Yes, Sarah. It's time to extend these changes across the entire network. One branch at a time, we're going to transform this bank into what it always should have been, a financial institution that truly serves everyone. 2 weeks had passed since Marcus Richardson's undercover visit, and First Metropolitan Bank's downtown branch was undergoing a remarkable transformation. The morning sun streamed through the windows as employees gathered for their daily briefing, led by branch manager Thompson, who had embraced his role as a champion of change with unexpected enthusiasm. Yesterday, we processed 15 new premium account applications from diverse communities, Thompson announced proudly to his team. The employees had grown accustomed to their CEO's regular visits, but there was still a respectful hush when he entered the room. Gone was the nervousness of guilt. It had been replaced by a genuine desire to prove themselves worthy of his trust. Jessica Carter, who had nearly resigned 2 weeks ago, stood up to present her report. Her voice was confident now, carrying none of the shame that had weighed her down before. The customer service satisfaction ratings have increased by 30%, she said. And our community outreach programs are filled to capacity for the next month. Marcus nodded approvingly, then addressed the group. I've been monitoring the changes here closely. Your progress is impressive, but we're not done yet. He motioned to Sarah Chen, who distributed new folders to everyone. These contain the next phase of our transformation, Marcus explained. We're expanding our financial literacy workshops to include evening sessions for working families. We're also launching a new small business loan program specifically designed to support minority entrepreneurs. Thompson stepped forward eagerly. Sir, I've already identified several local community leaders who are interested in partnering with us for these initiatives. The same leaders who couldn't get past our front desk 3 weeks ago, Marcus asked pointedly, causing Thompson to flush with embarrassment. That's exactly why this work is so important. We're not just changing policies, we're changing lives. One of the security guards, Michael Torres, raised his hand. Mr. Richardson, I've been thinking about our role in making customers feel welcome. Would it be possible to receive additional training in cultural sensitivity? Sometimes people see us as intimidating, and I want to change that perception. Marcus smiled. That's exactly the kind of initiative I want to see. Ms. Chen, please arrange for enhanced training for our security team. In fact, let's make Mr. Torres our security training coordinator. The morning meeting continued with various team members sharing their experiences and suggestions. The transformation wasn't just in policies and procedures. It was evident in the way employees engaged with each other and thought about their roles. After the meeting, Marcus called Thompson into his office. The branch manager had lost weight over the past 2 weeks, and his red tie was slightly crooked, signs of the intense effort he'd been putting into the changes. Richard, Marcus began, I've been reviewing your progress reports. The changes you've implemented here are significant. Thompson straightened in his chair. Thank you, sir, but I know we still have a long way to go. Yes, we do, Marcus agreed. That's why I'm promoting you to Regional Director of Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives. Thompson's mouth fell open. Sir? You've shown that people can change when given the chance. Your experience, both the mistakes and the corrections, makes you uniquely qualified to help other branches undergo similar transformations. As Thompson struggled to find words, Sarah entered with more news. Sir, the local business association called. They want to recognize First Metropolitan for our community outreach efforts. Apparently, word has spread about our new initiatives. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Decline the recognition, Sarah. We're not doing this for awards. We're doing it because it's right. Thompson finally found his voice. Sir, about that day when you first came in, I'll never forget the lesson you taught us. Good, Marcus replied firmly. Because tomorrow, we start implementing these changes across all our branches. The real work is just beginning. As Thompson left the office, Marcus watched through his window as a diverse group of customers entered the bank. Each was greeted with the same warm welcome, regardless of their appearance or attire. A young black entrepreneur was discussing a business loan with Jessica, while Michael Torres was helping an elderly Asian couple find the right department. Sarah approached his desk. The board members are waiting for your video call, sir. They're eager to hear about the success of our pilot program. Marcus straightened his tie. Then let's not keep them waiting. It's time to show them that doing the right thing isn't just morally correct. It's good business too. 1 month into the transformation, First Metropolitan Bank's board of directors gathered in the main conference room of their corporate headquarters. The quarterly meeting had drawn unusual attention, with every seat filled and additional. Marcus Richardson stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding as always. Behind him, a large screen displayed impressive statistics. Loan approval rates have become more equitable across all demographics, customer satisfaction scores had risen dramatically, and new account openings had increased by 40%. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, what you're seeing is not just numbers on a screen. These figures represent real people who, for the first time, feel truly welcomed by their bank. He nodded to Thompson, who was now wearing a new suit that matched his elevated position as regional director. Thompson stepped forward, clicking to the next slide. Our pilot program at the downtown branch has exceeded all expectations. The changes we implemented have not only improved our community relations, but have also significantly increased our revenue. Several board members leaned forward, their interest piqued by the mention of improved profits. Marcus had known this would grab their attention. After all, some had initially resisted his diversity initiatives, worried about the bottom line. But the most significant changes, Marcus continued, can't be measured in dollars. Sarah, please share the customer feedback. Sarah Chen stepped up, her tablet in hand. We've received hundreds of letters from customers who previously felt excluded from traditional banking services. One letter in particular stands out. She began to read. For 20 years, I was afraid to enter a bank. Today, my daughter opened her first business account at First Metropolitan, and the staff treated her like family. The room fell silent as the weight of those words sank in. Marcus used this moment to introduce his next proposal. Phase 2 of our transformation begins next week. We're expanding these initiatives to all branches across the state. One of the older board members, Harold Matthews, raised his hand. This is all very impressive, Mr. Richardson, but the costs of such extensive training and community programs are already paying for themselves. Marcus interrupted smoothly. Our loan default rates have actually decreased since we began providing proper financial education and support. When you treat people with respect and give them the tools to succeed, everyone wins. Jessica Carter, who had been invited to speak about the customer service transformations, shared her personal story next. A month ago, I almost resigned because I couldn't face my own biases. Today, I train other employees to recognize and overcome theirs. The change in our workplace culture has been remarkable. The presentation continued with more success stories and concrete data. Even the skeptics on the board couldn't deny the positive impact of the changes. Marcus saved his biggest announcement for last. Beginning next quarter, we're launching the First Metropolitan Community Investment Fund. We'll be allocating $50 million specifically for small business loans in underserved communities. A murmur rippled through the room. This was a bold move, even with the recent successes. Marcus held up his hand for silence. I stand before you today not just as your CEO, but as someone who remembers being turned away from banks much like ours. The difference is, I had the opportunity to change things from the inside. Not everyone gets that chance. Thompson stepped forward again. We've already identified potential loan recipients through our community workshops. These are solid business plans that were previously overlooked simply because of who presented them. The board members began nodding, convinced by the combination of social responsibility and sound business strategy. Marcus could see the transformation happening in real time, just as it had happened in the downtown branch. As the meeting concluded, board members gathered around Marcus, eager to learn more about implementing these changes in their own regions. Sarah organized them into groups for detailed briefings with Thompson and his team. Marcus stood back, watching the enthusiasm spread. He caught sight of his reflection in the window, the same man who had walked into the downtown branch wearing an old leather jacket, but now standing tall in his CEO suit. The contrast reminded him of how far they'd come, and how far they still had to go. Sir. Sarah approached with her tablet. The press is requesting interviews about our initiatives. They're calling it a banking revolution. Marcus straightened his tie, a small smile playing on his lips. Tell them it's not a revolution, Sarah. It's simply doing what should have been done all along. 3 months after the board meeting, First Metropolitan Bank had become a case study in successful corporate transformation. On a crisp morning, the space, once filled with rarely used luxury office furniture, now buzzed with activity. Local entrepreneurs gathered around tables, discussing business plans with bank advisors. Senior citizens attended digital banking classes, while young families learned about homeownership and investment strategies. Mr. Richardson, Thompson called from the doorway. The news crew is here for the interview about our community investment fund's first success stories. Marcus nodded, straightening his tie as he walked to the main lobby where cameras were being set up. The first recipient of their new loan program, a young black woman named Maya Wilson, stood nervously nearby. She had turned her grandmother's soul food recipes into a thriving catering business with help from First Metropolitan's new initiatives. Ms. Wilson, Marcus said warmly, ready to tell your story? Maya smiled, her confidence growing. Thanks to you and this bank, I finally have a story worth telling. 6 months ago, 3 other banks rejected my loan application. Now I'm employing 12 people and opening my second location. The interview began, with Maya sharing her journey from rejection to success. As she spoke, Marcus noticed Jessica Carter leading a customer service training session in the adjacent room. Through the glass walls, you could see her demonstrating proper greeting protocols to new employees from other branches. After the interview, Marcus called his leadership team together. Thompson, now sporting gray at his temples from the intensive work of the past months, presented the latest results. We've approved over 200 small business loans through the Community Investment Fund, Thompson reported. Default rate is less than 1%, proving that our enhanced screening and support systems are working. Sarah Chen added, our customer base has grown by 60% across all demographics. The waiting list for our financial education programs extends 3 months out, and other banks are asking to study our model. Marcus listened proudly as each team member reported their successes. Michael Torres, the former security guard now heading customer relations, shared how his team had transformed the bank's approach to security while maintaining a welcoming environment. But here's what matters most, Marcus said, pulling out a letter from his pocket. This came in yesterday from an elderly gentleman. He writes, for the first time in my life, I walked into a bank and felt like a valued customer, not a suspect. The room fell quiet as the weight of those words sank in. They'd all remembered that day when Marcus had tested them, exposing their biases and changing their perspectives forever. We've done good work, Marcus continued, but we can't become complacent. Success brings responsibility. Other banks are watching us. We need to show them that inclusive banking isn't just a program, it's the future of finance. Later that afternoon, Marcus walked through the bank lobby, observing the natural interaction between staff and customers of all backgrounds. Gone were the suspicious glances and discriminatory practices. In their place was genuine respect and professional service for everyone. He paused at Jessica's desk, where she was helping an elderly Asian couple open a new account. Her patience and respect were evident in every interaction, a far cry from her behavior during his undercover visit. Mr. Richardson, Sarah approached with her ever-present tablet. The Federal Reserve has requested that you speak at their upcoming conference on banking equality. They want to use First Metropolitan as a model for national banking reforms. Marcus looked around at what they had built. The physical changes were obvious: the new community center, the updated lobby, the diverse staff. But the real transformation was in the less visible things. The changed attitudes, the restored dignity, the bridged divisions. Schedule the speech, Sarah, he said. But make sure they understand. This isn't about one bank's success story. It's about showing the entire industry what's possible when you remove barriers and give everyone a fair chance. As the day went down, Marcus stood at his office window, watching customers leave with smiles on their faces. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the marble floor where, just months ago, he had stood in his old leather jacket, deliberately ignored and dismissed. Sir, Thompson knocked on his door. The evening financial literacy class is about to begin. Would you like to say a few words to the participants? Marcus smiled, straightening his suit jacket. Yes, Richard. I think I have quite a story to tell them about the power of change. 6 months after Marcus Richardson's undercover visit, First Metropolitan Bank hosted a special evening event to celebrate its complete transformation. The downtown branch's lobby had been transformed into an elegant reception area with guests from all walks of life mingling together: bank employees, community leaders, successful loan recipients, and financial industry executives. Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at the diverse crowd. His eyes settled on familiar faces. Thompson, who had lost his arrogant demeanor and gained genuine respect among his peers. Jessica, now a nationally recognized trainer in inclusive banking practices. And Michael Torres, whose security team had become a model for welcoming customer service. 1 year ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying across the hushed room, I walked through these doors wearing an old leather jacket. I was ignored, dismissed, and nearly thrown out. He paused, letting the memory sink in. Today, I stand here not to remind you of that shame, but to celebrate how far we've come. The screens behind him displayed impressive statistics. Over 500 successful small business loans to previously underserved communities, thousands of participants in financial literacy programs, and customer satisfaction scores that led the industry. But Marcus wasn't focused on numbers. Maya Wilson, he called out, and the successful caterer stood up. Would you share with everyone what you told me earlier today? Maya stepped forward, confident in her new business suit. 6 months ago, I was cooking from my grandmother's recipes in my kitchen. Today, thanks to First Metropolitan, I own 3 restaurants and employ 35 people from our community. Applause filled the room as Maya returned to her seat. Marcus continued, and that's just one story. Sarah, how many similar success stories do we have? Sarah Chen, now promoted to Director of Community Development, stepped up. Over thousands of families have achieved their financial goals through our programs. We've helped fund new businesses, first-time homebuyers, and college educations. But more importantly, we've changed how banking works. Thompson took the stage next, his presentation showing how other banks were now following First Metropolitan's lead. Our model has been adopted by 23 other banking institutions across the country. The Federal Reserve has incorporated our guidelines into their recommended practices. As Marcus watched, he saw Jessica wiping tears from her eyes. He remembered her near resignation months ago and how she had transformed her guilt into positive action. She now traveled nationwide, teaching other banks how to recognize and overcome institutional bias. But our work isn't finished, Marcus declared. Today, I'm announcing the expansion of our Community Investment Fund to $1 billion. We're opening 5 new community centers, and our training programs will be available online to reach rural communities. The announcement drew gasps and then thunderous applause. Even the most conservative board members were nodding in approval, won over by the undeniable success of the program. And one more thing, Marcus added, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out the old leather jacket he'd worn that fateful day. This will be displayed in our lobby as a reminder, not of discrimination, but of transformation, not of shame, but of change. The jacket would hang in a glass case with a simple plaque reading, "Change begins with how we see others. Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect." As the evening drew to a close, Marcus watched the diverse crowd mingling naturally. Bank executives chatted with small business owners, security guards shared jokes with customers, and new employees learned from experienced mentors of all backgrounds. Sarah approached with one final update. "Sir, the last numbers are in. Our profitability has increased by 40% since implementing these changes. Turns out doing the right thing is good business." Marcus nodded, but his attention was on an elderly black man who had just walked into the bank. A young employee immediately greeted him with respect and warmth, leading him to a comfortable seat. There was no hesitation, no bias, no suspicion, just professional service and human dignity. That, Marcus said quietly to Sarah, is what success looks like. As the celebration continued, Marcus stepped out onto the bank's steps, looking up at the First Metropolitan sign glowing in the evening sky. The bank had become more than just a financial institution. It was now a symbol of what was possible when people chose to change. Inside, the old leather jacket would remind future generations of bankers that true value isn't measured by appearances, and that the most important transaction in banking isn't the exchange of money, but the exchange of respect. The end.